Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can all hear me. Thank you so much for being so prompt in joining our first webinar to discuss the AI ethics in action and the case for responsible innovation. I think we'll kick off. I'm sure other people will join as we continue. But as I said, this is the first of a three-part series of webinars designed to really engage you all in the conversation around AI ethics and to tell you a little bit about our new AI governance initiative here at the Thomson Reuters Foundation in partnership with UNESCO. So I'm going to run you through the agenda before we start. Today, we are going to be telling you a little bit about the UNESCO Thomson Reuters Foundation partnership, and then we'll launch straight into talking a little bit about our AI governance survey. And then shortly after that, we will cover some of the key legislative practices that are currently in play to give a bit of context about what's going on in the AI landscape at the moment. And then we'll move on to discuss the business case for transparency and the business case for ethical AI adoption. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Rosie McKenzie and James Wright, and they are from Thomson Reuters Foundation and UNESCO respectively, and they'll introduce themselves respectively when they also participate in the webinar today. Just a few little housekeeping rules and notifications before we get started. So there is no chat function. I'm afraid that's disabled, but there will be an opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to submit your questions. You can do that throughout the webinar or at the end when we open the Q&A, but it will certainly help us to get through as many as we can if you do submit them as they come up throughout the session. So feel free. And I think without further ado, I will move on just to introduce you a little bit to the Thomson Reuters Foundation. So we are the corporate foundation of Thomson Reuters, a world-leading content and technology company. And our mission is to strengthen free, fair and informed societies. And we do that by promoting responsible business practices. And we see a really key part of that as being promoting corporate transparency and indeed voluntary disclosure. And Thomson Reuters Foundation is the proud home of the Workforce Disclosure Initiative, or WDI, and many of you will already be familiar with that. And WDI is one of the world's leading programs aimed at improving corporate transparency and accountability on workforce issues. And we do that by providing companies and investors with comprehensive and comparable data, which is then disclosed by companies on an annual basis. And we've very much taken the same approach when we're looking at responsible and ethical AI adoption. And to do that, we have partnered with UNESCO. And I'll talk to you a little bit about our partnership with UNESCO. Firstly, to introduce James Wright, who's a program specialist at the Ethics of AI team at UNESCO, and he'll talk a little bit about the UNESCO recommendations on the ethics of AI, which this survey builds on. So James, if I could hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Katie, and it's great to have the opportunity to talk to the audience members who've signed up. So you might think, why is UNESCO involved in AI? Like, what's the connection? I think most people associate UNESCO in their mind with culture, with World Heritage, or maybe with education, which is the biggest part of our organization. But the S in UNESCO stands for science. It includes natural sciences and also social and human sciences. In fact, we're the only UN specialized agency with the remit for science as a whole. And within the social and human sciences sector, we have a section focusing on bioethics and ethics of science and technology, which is where I'm based, which has a long history of developing and implementing ethical frameworks for science and technology. So as you can imagine, one of the biggest areas that we've been working on in the last few years is AI. We were quite an early mover in this domain, and we worked with our member states to develop the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI. It was adopted in 2021. And actually, it was, and it still is, the only globally adopted normative standard in the area of AI ethics. It's been accepted by or adopted by all of our 194 member states. Every country in the EU, UK, US, China, ASEAN nations, African countries, like across the world. So very briefly, this recommendation is a human rights-based framework. It sets out ethical values and principles, as well as policy actions that can be taken by governments and other actors to build an ethical, equitable, and responsible ecosystem for AI. So in our work to help implement this recommendation, we mainly work with governments, but of course it's companies who are the main drivers in developing and deploying AI systems. And we've been engaged with the private sector through our Business Council on Ethics of AI, which is co-chaired by Microsoft and Telefonica. But we're particularly excited to partner with TRF on this AI governance survey because it's really a flagship initiative to enable companies to map in a really comprehensive fashion where they stand in respect to ethical practices and structures when designing, developing, deploying AI technologies as a very important way to align with the UNESCO recommendation from a corporate perspective. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you very much, James, for explaining that. And the premise of the AI governance survey is that it would take a very similar format to the Workforce Disclosure Initiative, which will be familiar to so many of you on the call today. It is in the format of a survey, and it is entirely voluntary for companies to engage with. And it will really act as a prompt for companies to support and guide them through the ethical adoption of AI. So one of the things we would really like to stress is that this is for companies at any stage of their AI adoption. If you're at an extremely early stage, this will act as a governance tool to help support and guide you through the critical questions that perhaps you or your organizations need to ask in order to ensure ethical adoption throughout your organization, and indeed to manage risk. Of course, for companies, the ethical adoption of AI is really important for workers, but it's also really, really important for business. And that's why we cover such a wide range of topics within the survey. And what we're intending to do is to open the survey for a disclosure window, which will be launched on the 1st of July. And that will stay open until the end of September. And that's the period and the window within which companies will have the opportunity to submit their answers to the survey. Again, much the same as WDI, there will be an option to disclose your survey responses publicly or to keep those confidential, and just to allow that to feed into the data analytics that we will be generating for the companies themselves and also for our investor signatories. So some of the topics that the AI governance survey will cover include a really wide array, as I've mentioned. So from strategic questions such as whether you have a company strategy or a governance framework that supports the implementation guidelines on AI, through to institutional. So do you have a designated board, committee, or persons designated to review issues of accountability and responsibility? And then more operational issues, such as whether you actually have a policy for ensuring that there is a human overseeing the AI systems that you deploy. And then, of course, we move into workers' rights and representation, and whether there are internal mechanisms through which employees might be able to submit complaints, for example. We also want to address diversity and inclusion. And we want to ensure that there are questions being asked around the inclusivity and diversity of the teams working on developing AI, addressing issues such as bias. And then also data and safety and security, both of which are really paramount to companies assessing and mitigating risks within their organizations. So data storage, whether there is a level of security commensurate with the sensitivity of data that is being generated through AI, and also whether there are dedicated teams of people investigating emerging risks, for example. So that covers the main content of the questions. The survey will actually be available from the end of March for stakeholders who sign up to view in advance of the disclosure window. So there will be plenty of time to prepare and consider whether or not you are able to, and the extent to which you're able to answer each of the survey questions. And I'm going to hand back to James now, just to run us through a little bit of the current state of play around AI legislation and practices.
Thanks. So as I mentioned at UNESCO, our main body of work on AI governance is with governments. And this is an area where, of course, as you know, we've been seeing a growing amount of activity over the past few years. I'm sure that many of you on the call, probably all of you on the call, are quite familiar with the EU AI Act, which came into force last year. We're actually at UNESCO currently working with the Dutch Digital Infrastructure Authority, who are leading competent authorities on AI to help these competent authorities build the capacities and capabilities to actually implement the AI Act. I think what we've seen with that act is the legislation is put in place, but there are still questions about how it's actually put into practice. And I think it's a common challenge across many different countries, territories. We're also seeing action more broadly. So the risk-based approach to AI regulation that we see with the AI Act is also starting to be implemented elsewhere. So for instance, Brazil brought in a similar risk-based system. China actually was one of the first countries to bring in legislation in this area with different provisions related to algorithmic recommender systems and generative AI. And actually in the US, we've seen the Biden administration's executive order, but also a lot of legislative activity at the state level. So for instance, last year, 45 states introduced AI bills and 31 states adopted resolutions or actually enacted legislation. So there's really a lot going on. From UNESCO's perspective, we're currently working with many of these countries, several EU countries, Brazil, Argentina, India, and Bangladesh, on an AI readiness assessment methodology, which is designed to assess where a country stands in relation to its readiness to implement AI ethically. And then we provide tailored policy recommendations to the country and help them to actually implement them. So it's an interesting time for us because many countries have developed a national AI strategy, but they're still in the process of developing laws, regulations, institutions, in part, I think, to see what's going to happen next with generative AI, perhaps also to understand what works in this space. So for instance, I think many countries are looking to the AI Act to see how it's going to work in practice. And how much of a regulatory burden it's going to be putting on businesses. So overall, while most countries' regulatory regimes are still under development, I think we're starting to see different approaches emerge, as well as how they might work in practice. And I think we're going to see a lot more on this in the next few years. So I'll hand back to you, Katie.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to pass now to Rosie McKenzie. Rosie is our Senior Company Engagement Manager at Thomson Reuters Foundation. And Rosie, you are just going to talk us through the business case for transparency and for ethical AI adoption.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time. I can see lots of familiar names on the call from the WDI side of things. So thank you so much for your interest in this. So I think as we have all been, well, lots of us have been working on the WDI, the value of transparency is well established, but always good to run through the principles that we work on. So making sure you're taking stock of your organization's current situation with really good, solid, sound data gathering means you will, of course, be prepared for any future developments in the area of ethical AI around accreditation or any risks that are associated with adopting AI. So it's a really good opportunity to future-proof your business in a sustainable way. Working through the survey as well means that you can, of course, discover a roadmap for what best practice looks like, and participating companies can learn from each other in a very sort of collaborative way. The questions in the survey will mean that you are aligned with relevant regulations and standards, so you will be ahead of the curve. And by committing to a voluntary initiative like this, your organisation will show all stakeholders, will clearly demonstrate to all stakeholders that ethical AI use is at the very centre of your business and positioning you as a leader in the transparent and responsible use of technology. And then finally, as the initiative develops, participating companies will, of course, have the opportunity to take part in workshops with experts in the area, investors, and of course, other companies to learn from each other about salient issues and good practice. So lots of incentives, hopefully, from just the transparency side, but also we just wanted to flash up a few reasons why ethical AI is important beyond, of course, the obvious aspects with time efficiencies, cost savings, and innovation. There are a few aspects that it's worth outlining in today's discussion. So firstly, obviously, recruitment. I think we all know AI is being used a lot already in streamlining the recruitment processes with lots of different AI tools. But perhaps more importantly, it should, of course, remove bias from any recruitment process with tools that are properly trained and tested. I think we all had a steep learning curve back in 2014 when Amazon implemented a recruitment tool when they began to build a computer program to aid in reviewing job applications to help identify suitable employees. But for those of you who are aware of this example, by the next year, by 2015, they'd realised that in software development positions, the program wasn't giving them gender neutral candidate ratings, not through any fault of Amazon's, nothing they'd built purposefully into the tool, but the AI system interpreted the fact that software development was a male dominated world as an indicator that men were better at it, and it therefore very quickly preferred male applicants and penalised applicants who graduated from a women's college or participated in female dominated organisations just through its own deterministic logic. So we've learned a lot since then, and AI tools have come on a long way from them, but it's really, really important that AI can be really helpful in removing that bias. Secondly, then, customer engagement. Obviously, AI can really help improve the customer experience by showing people what's most relevant to them, what's useful to them. But beyond that, there's a really compelling business case for ensuring anyone who applies for a position in a particular organization leaves with a really positive experience. because lots of research has been done into this, and some companies have found the overlap between applicants and customers is really significant. The example that always comes up with that is Virgin Media noticed a $5 million revenue loss after 6% of their rejected applicants unsubscribed as candidates. So as customers, excuse me. So a really sort of clear cause and effect there. Moving on more then to a bit more around sort of the legal aspects. We've all seen that technology often outpaces standards and regulations, and the surveys aim to help companies prepare for all of that. So organizations really do need to be very proactively creating ethical AI governance structures within their business. As well as staying ahead of the regulatory curve, leaders who create internal guidance and standards will also set themselves up as recognized experts, which of course carries many other benefits. They can help policymakers shape future regulatory processes and help drive innovation as industry leaders. So really making sure your company's at the forefront of these really fast-paced and quickly changing issues. That brings us on to sustainability and growth. And we're really keen to see that organizations who prioritize responsible AI, they are now better positioned to be successful in the future. There has been a survey by the Economist Intelligence Unit, the EIU, where about 72% of survey respondents reported that ethical reviews in the development or use of AI are very important or critically important for shareholder and investor relations. So overwhelming majority there seeing it as a really important issue. And without being able to demonstrate clear practices to stakeholders and customers, an organization's AI won't inspire trust, to be brutally frank about it. Organizations that adopt and promote ethical AI will place themselves in a better position to build ties with all kinds of stakeholders, government agencies, institutions, public sector entities, all of whom are, of course, displaying a really keen interest in responsible AI, and be able to build those relationships now puts the organization in a really solid position for the future. Finally, then, of course, we all know that good quality data is really important part of doing business these days, and being responsible with that data is really important. The safeguarding privacy and ensuring accuracy of data is really, really essential. Aside from the significant cost of data breaches, obviously, any data being collected through AI technologies is a highly valuable commodity for any organization, and making sure policies are in place to ensure any data repositories are accurate and safeguarded is really, really, really important. Finally, then, just wanted to flash up a few examples of what's already happening in the corporate AI space. So here are just a few for you. We're not by any means saying that these are sort of a gold standard, but if anyone's interested in seeing what's already happening out there, what's already real life examples, these are a few that you can maybe go in and have a look at, as they've already been in place and already been rolled out. Lovely. So Katie, I'll hand back over to you for the Q&A.
Thank you so much. And we've had quite a few questions come in, so that's really great to see. Thanks so much for being so engaged, everyone. We will aim to wrap up in 5 to 10 minutes, so do bear with us. But first, there was a question about clarifying how Microsoft and Telefonica are involved, because they were mentioned earlier. James, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So the business council that I mentioned, that's co-chaired by Microsoft and Telefonica, that's a group that UNESCO interacts with. They're our main interlocutor from the private sector, and we work with them. So the members of that business council have signed up to the values and principles of the UNESCO recommendation. and we've consulted with them on the development of the of this survey. In part to make sure that the questions that we're asking make sense from a business perspective, make sense from the perspective of different types of business in the way that they work with either developing or deploying AI systems.
Thank you so much. I hope that answered the question. Thanks, Victoria. I can see that you've replied. And the next question is just around early adoption. So our company is just starting to use AI. How can the survey help with that implementation? And I'll take that one. Just as I mentioned earlier, we are really, really keen to have respondents at all stages of their AI adoption. So if you're just starting out in using AI, this is the perfect opportunity to engage with the survey because it really can be used as a guidance document. There's no right or wrong answers at this stage. We are really trying to promote transparency. So if you cannot answer the questions, that is absolutely fine because that will inevitably act as a prompt for you to go away, and hopefully during the next disclosure window, you might well be able to answer it. And it really helps you to prioritize those questions internally. And then the next question is, we're not ready to discuss our use of AI externally. What should we do if we're asked to fill out the survey? Rosie, can I go to you to answer that one?
Thanks, Katie. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So very much like Katie has said, the survey is very much intended as a tool. So even if there are some things that you're not ready to discuss externally, this is a really good opportunity to make sure that you have all the information that you need on how your company is using or developing AI, but also you don't have to submit all your answers publicly. So if you don't want all your AI information out there quite yet, you can still go through the survey. You can put in as much information as you're comfortable with, and then you can submit your answers not publicly, so that you can still get some feedback from us. You can still be part of the process, and you can still learn from other responding companies, but you don't have to do all of that publicly. Ideally, at some point in the future, we would love it if everyone submitted all their answers publicly, but obviously this is, for many, many companies, this will be the beginning of the process. And as Katie says, that's absolutely fine. We don't want to put anyone in an uncomfortable position with responding to the survey.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank
Katie.
you so much, Rosie. Thank you. And actually, I'll come back to you again on this last question, which is, do we get benchmarked or scored if we respond to the survey?
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. So again, for those of you who have done the WDI, you will know that we have a score based on the level of transparency, so how many of the data points a company can provide. And the ambition is to do the same sort of thing for the AI governance survey. So you will indeed get some feedback and some straightforward but really, really insightful benchmarking. So we know from our experience on the WDI that's particularly helpful when companies are just starting out, because at the beginning, as is common in many avenues of life, we're just not sure what we don't know. It's those unknown unknowns. And that score won't be public. So please don't worry that that's going to be flashed up on a website or anything. That will be for your use internally to work out where you have information and where you maybe don't, where those data gaps exist within your organization.
Fantastic. And there's one more question that's asked about whether investors are actually involved in this survey. And while I answer that question, I wonder whether we might be able to issue a very short poll, just 2 very short questions to gain some insight from the attendees here today. It's all completely anonymous responses, so please, if you can, respond to those questions whilst I just answer that final Q&A question about investors. So as many of you will know, the Workforce Disclosure Initiative engages a signatory group of investors, and they are particularly interested in the disclosure of the companies, of course, that they're investing in with regard to labour rights. And the same will be said for the ethical adoption of AI. And what our anticipation is that it's only really a matter of time before investors and indeed insurers become very serious about evaluating the ethical adoption and the associated risk that companies are taking on in their rollout and adoption of AI. So our intention very much is to engage investors in the same way that we do for our workforce disclosure. And I think that we'll all be on a journey together in terms of how that data is used, how important it becomes. And again, just a plea that actually we are all really early adopters of this disclosure initiative. And it's just going to be really important that we lead by example and put ourselves out there in terms of really shaping the best practice around ethical adoption in the future. Okay, I think that we are going to wrap up then. You can see there's a holding slide on our screen which shows you how you can adopt the survey and also keep in touch with any of us. Please feel free to contact us after the event. And if you found this webinar helpful, please also feel free to promote any of the next 2 series or indeed join them yourselves. We'd love to have you back. Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.